right, everyone, welcome to week 3 here of Animal Imaginatomy. So the last couple weeks, we have been building up our foundational skills, right? We started with these construction forms, understanding how they work, that wedge shape, barrel shape, saddle shape for the chest, midsection, and hips, respectively. We've then moved on from there and started refining those shapes a little bit, right? We started to learn how to streamline those shapes, how to kind of sand the edges off of them, so to speak, round out those corners, make them feel a little more organic, and also push and pull those shapes. And then from there, we went ahead and learned the different types of head construction, both prey species and predator species, with those sideways facing eyes and those forward facing eyes. Now, this week, to build on top of that, we are starting to get into musculature a little bit. Now, I want to stress that this course is here to set you up for success with understanding the body plans of these creatures, right? What we want to do is get to know how these body plans work so we can better utilize them in our artwork. Now, this isn't an anatomy class. We're not necessarily going to dive into each and every individual muscle group, but because of the focus of this course, we do need to explore musculature a little bit here. So what we're going to do today is a little bit of a demo showing you how to go ahead and break down those construction forms further into constructive musculature. So let's go ahead and just get a really basic gesture in here. Let me get that a little smaller, or we're going to run off the page. There we go. So the last time we did a big body demo, we utilized a running species. We're going to utilize a stalking species this time. So I'm using a big cat for the basis for today's demo. So again, just starting off this demo the same way that we would start off any drawing. We're just coming in here and getting a nice little skeletal framework to begin with. There we go. We got a nice little rig here for what we will then go ahead and build out into our construction forms. Now, again, as we go ahead and bring these things up, I want to stress that backwards tilt to that forward shape. That's going to be very important here as we start to get into our musculature and break it down. Everything that we've done up to this point in time has been to set us up for success when we get into things like musculature and breaking down those forms, or understanding those big forms, right? So everything that we do builds on top of itself. Now, don't let that phrase can be a little bit of can lead to a little bit of confusion. My fault there. That phrase can lead to a little bit of confusion here, because when we say everything built on top of itself, we like to think that that means every feature that we add, we literally lay on top of the stuff that we're putting on in here. That's not the case. Remember that these construction forms that we're laying in, and I'm going pretty quick on laying in these construction forms because we've been through them several times, right? So I don't want to rehash that too much. But as we lay in these construction forms, we have to remember that these construction forms aren't necessarily underlying features that we build stuff on top of. These construction forms are simplifications and abstractions of the muscles themselves. So what we need to do, we don't need to think of it as laying muscles on top of here. Now, they do need to wrap around the form, obviously, so they need to wrap around those construction forms to feel whole and all. But we don't want to think of it as we're laying muscles on top so much as we're altering and refining those construction forms that we've already learned. Because remember, those forms, like I said, they're just they're just simplified versions of those muscle groups. Just shrinking down a little bit so we don't run out of space here. Getting that head a little bit bigger. We'll do a nice, really far forward step on this guy. Maybe fairly far forward. We don't want to go too far. Because I do want to show the twist and motion and pull of these shapes, but I don't want to go so far that you're like, wait, where did Tom go in this demo? I can't follow. There we go. Nice little sweep from the neck right on through to that belly, right? There we go. Now let's go ahead and clean this up just a little bit. And we can go ahead and get those front limbs situated in here. And I love doing these kinds of exercises. They're so much fun. Here we go. I never get tired of doing construction forms and refining them. All right, just coming down here, laying in the paw. And this far leg will have a step back on it. We're going to draw right through here from that chest construction form, right on back. Remember, we want that to kind of pull back on that. We can get that little slice out of there. The slice, you're not going to see too much of that little slice being pulled out of there. Instead, what you kind of want to think of this as is almost like this whole backside, because of that split. Hold on, let me show you how this is going to work. Let me step back here so you can see that edge that we laid in. So what you want to kind of think of this as this leg goes back, so we're still talking a little bit about construction forms being pushed and pulled, right? As that leg steps back, you saw how I pulled that line from that whole construction form. Now, as we do that, these corners obviously are going to be pulling back as well, right? Remember, this far corner of the construction form on each side, we need to be at the elbow region. So as this leg steps back, this whole side shifts. But remember, we removed that little slice out of here, right? We don't have that little slice. So this whole section here on the far side can move that much more. So what you get, you don't necessarily see that little slice at this extreme step back at that angle, because that little gap is being kind of squashed out of existence. It's almost like those two sides are coming together and meeting as this leg gets pulled back and pulls that tissue back. So what we need to do there is get rid of just a little bit of this leg. You're going to see a little bit of the humerus poking over here, if that, and it might even look a little strange at first, but we get just a little bit of that humerus poking over. We get that, even that we might not even see on a big cat, depending on the big cat. We may just get that that front limb that we see here, the nearest one to us, because of that wedge shape being pulled all the way back. Yeah, that feels more accurate. Now, the other half of this, like I said, you'd maybe get a little bit of the head poking out there, but for the clarity of the drawing's sake, we may wish to drop that. I'll leave a little bit in there for now. We can fight to see if it'll work, but it might end up looking a little odd in the end. And remember, clarity is really always the end game plan. We don't want to be flashy. We don't want to try to show off, look, I know this anatomy here, so I put it in there. If it's not adding to the clarity of the piece and assisting the viewer with understanding what you're trying to do with it, it doesn't help the overall drawing, and you should lose it. Or redesign it, All right, what we're doing here now, just coming in, laying in that other far paw. Here we go. Get a little bit of a twist and pronation outwards. We're just setting ourselves up to dive into these muscle groups. And again, the muscle groups that we're going to do today, they're generalized muscle groups. So we're going to be working with big forms, bigger shapes, not necessarily small, finicky little ones. And we're not memorizing every single individual muscle group, because again, that's not going to be terribly helpful to our goal here in this class. Our goal is to understand how to put these creatures together to create more dynamic forms and to give us a greater understanding of these animals so we can utilize them in our artwork. There we go. That's looking fun. Let's get that tail in here too. I'm going to pull that tail up a little bit just so we have a little bit of clarity for that back leg. There we go. Just our little generic cat, kind of a a little bit of a leopardy build to him. Leopards have this great kind of middle of the road build for the big cats. They're not too stocky, they're not too lanky, they're kind of just great generic big cat. So we're going to go ahead and just block this in a little bit. I'm going to add some values to this. And this is what I'm going to want you guys to do for your homework. Now your homework it's going to be a little tricky. We'll get to that towards the end of class. But for now, I want you guys to go ahead and lay in some value on these. This is just a base layer of value I'm putting down. I'm going to show you how we're going to roll this form as we bring up that musculature. Really, the main reason I'm doing this is it allows me for a nice little tonal base to go ahead and build up those forms with for you so you can see how they work. I can add those highlights, push those shadows a little bit more. And that's what I want to see in your homework once we get to talking about that. Showing how you can push those forms by utilizing your values a little bit as we further delineate those forms, as we further figure out what makes them up, right? Come over here to this leg, pull it on back. There we go. Good stuff. All right, there's a little tonal base. I don't think we're going to get into the head too much. We had an entire course on the head last week, and quite a good deal on the big cat head as well. I'll probably ghost a little bit of one in here, depending on the time we've got, but we'll see. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and lay in a little bit of value on the front of that muzzle and get to, oh no, we have a big mark there that happened by the tail. That's weird. All right, now we'll get to our individual muscles, or muscle groupings rather. I just spent the entire first part of this demo telling you how we're not doing individual muscles, and then I slipped up and said individual muscles just now. Muscle groupings, we're getting to our muscle groupings now. So, as I mentioned, we need to make sure that we have our construction forms, our proportion, etc., really locked in before we get into this process. It's very similar to what we did on week 2, but with a little more attention to nuance, a little more attention to detail, right? So in week 2, as we mentioned, we went ahead and altered those construction forms. We played around with those construction forms, pushed and pulled those shapes, and made them more fluid, right? So we did things like, let me get the right width here. We did things like we came in here in certain areas and really smoothed out these sections, right? We got some nice, beautiful, refined contouring happen there. And that's what we're going to do here a little bit. We're going to start doing that, but we're going to do it with a little bit more focus, not just on rounding out these corners and all, but with adding volume to the musculature, and that'll help us then understand how those large construction forms are abstractions of those muscle groups. So let's go ahead and start here with the forelimbs. So as we already learned, we have that elbow coming up and connecting to the far end, right? The front head of this shape, if we remember, is where our humerus, the upper arm bone, goes, right? It lays right in here. Here's where the elbow is. Here's where it connects up to the shoulder blade. Now, the shoulder blade itself lies right in here, and that's why it's so important that we get that backwards tilt. We talked very briefly about this in one of the demos, but that shoulder blade is what makes this backwards tilt so important. We want to get that in the right spot. So we've got kind of our course plotted out, right? So let's begin now laying in our muscles. The first group that we want to go ahead and approach in here is going to be our deltoids up here. So the deltoids are going to lie right on top of that scapula that we just laid in. And the deltoids, again, we're not going to go into crazy amounts of detail on these. We're just going to think large, big shapes, right? So the deltoids are going to take up this section on the side plane of our wedge shape. There we go. They kind of come up right here by that little trademark hunch on the cat shoulders, right? And there we are. I'm now tucking in that midsection piece against our wedge piece, our wedge construction piece, by applying a little bit of value there. And that's going to help pop the contour of that deltoid mass a little bit, right? Because the idea is, remember how we said last week, what's important here is the overlap. It's not necessarily, or was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I'm not really sure when I stated that, but it might have actually been in one of the critiques. Now that I'm thinking about it, I believe it was. We had a student ask about perspective in one of the critiques, asking about how important it is to pay attention to perspective on these creatures as we draw them. And it's not, and I'm going to answer that here for everybody, it's not terribly important to focus on the perspective of these animals as you draw them as much as it would be to focus on the perspective of, say, a car or a vehicle or something like that, because these are not boxy forms, and each part of this creature is moving at a different angle from the other parts, right? It's not all moving in unison like a car or a vehicle would be. The torso can twist in one direction, the legs can twist in another direction. And what that ends up doing for us is giving us several different pieces that are all going towards different vanishing points. So it doesn't really behoove us very much to worry so much about perspective. We want to think a little bit about it, but we want to focus more on the overlap, right? The overlapping big forms in here, because that's what's going to help make that depth relationship read, right? That going back in space kind of vibe, right? Going back towards the horizon line. That's what we want to pop. That's what we want to read in our pieces. And to do that, we're going to overlap areas. Shoulders overlapping with midsection, overlapping with lumbar, overlapping with hips. So what we're doing here is pushing that value a little bit to make sure that this piece pops in front of our midsection. Now, as we come down here, we have our deltoid mass established here. Again, just a really rough mass. It's just going to be a little slab that kind of sits on that side. What I'm thinking of this is, I'm thinking of this shoulder mass just being refined more. It's the same shape, takes up the same area. We're just getting more nuanced in what the topography of that shape looks like. So as we come down here now, this section here on the side, we've got this nice big triangle wedge here, right? That big triangle wedge on that side there is a representation of the triceps. A really easy way to remember that, right? We have that triangle, triceps. So those triceps are going to come on down right here along the back of the arm, forelimb rather. We use the proper terms. It's these nice kind of three heads that kind of interlock with one another. There we go. So just these nice three bumps that kind of come on down. One, interlocking with the next, interlocking with the next. And they form this really nice edge that leads to the underside of our chest plane here, right? There's the underside of that chest plane. But we now have that side plane established, and we see how it planks now to the underside. We see what makes that happen. It's the bulging of those triceps. There we go. Oh, let's go ahead and tone those down just a little bit. They were looking a little too striation-y for me. There we go. Cool. Now there's a lot of very particular muscles that are happening up here in the neck and the way that they come down and wrap into the chest. We're not going to get into those too much here, partially because it's a whole class in and of itself, right? As I mentioned before, anatomy courses, they're their own thing. And there's a reason that they're their own thing, because it's a lot of information to tackle. We are going to go ahead and touch on at least this one large muscle because it makes a big difference for these big cats, the brachiocephalicus. It comes on down here. It's a big word for just a large sheet of muscle that attaches to the back of the neck here. And it comes on down and it plays up into our chest abstraction here because it's going to help get that sweeping line. So it's going to attach back at the base of the skull, and it spans a good deal of that neck before coming down and inserting on the front side, kind of the inside of that leg, kind of on the other side of that forearm. The forearm then, now the only reason we're really going into that neck muscle is because it does give that nice stretch to it, but then also, more importantly, it acts as a tucking and an anchor point for the forearm. The forearm then is going to twist out, right? So we have the brachiocephalicus overlapping here with our triceps, and that forearm shape is going to twist out of kind of the little pocket that these two are making. So it's kind of coming out from inside of there. And again, these big names, don't worry about memorizing these right now. I want you more to focus on understanding these shapes and the volume behind these shapes, how they affect those construction forms, how those construction forms are just simplified versions of these shapes. That's what I want you to focus on. Don't worry about trying to memorize every single muscle or have every muscle word memorized. You should get to there. Like that should be a worthy goal. But to start, don't stress yourself out. It's not worth it at this point. You have to build a solid foundation. You have to understand how these forms work before you can really dive into how the particulars are put together. Very much always compare this to kind of woodworking, right? Where you're whittling away at a piece of wood and getting more and more specific. It's really what this is all about. You can see how I dropped that far corner shape, just like I said I was probably going to do early on, because of the way that wedge abstraction pulls back because of that split. That's why that split's so important. It allows that extra flexibility. There we go. We're looking good here. Let's go ahead and just add a little bit of volume to that forearm to make it read as if it's sitting underneath that ridge, that shelf that's made by the triceps. Now I get a lot of people asking where the biceps are on these guys. They really don't have very developed biceps. What you're going to see the bicep really on the other side of this limb on the inside, and it's kind of small and undeveloped because they're not using it for lifting things a lot, right? They're not pulling themselves up or lifting things to their mouth, really. There's more of a downward thrust to their motion. There we go. So there's our little breakdown of that forearm there, right? Got a little bit of that twist that we learned about in our abstraction phase, our construction form phase there for the predators. I'm going to go ahead and push those values a little bit as the neck butts up against the shoulder mass so we can show off that deltoid a little bit more. And you can really see now how the forms, you can really see now how those construction forms are making, are building out a great foundation for this muscle exploration. And you can see how important they are to get in there initially and get in there at the right angles because they help support these muscle groupings. All right, coming back here, midsection, there's not much that we're going to get into in the midsection, to be honest with you. There's just not a lot. The most important thing in the midsection is to make sure that you have the flow from the beginning phases of this drawing set up right? That means, coming from the neckline all the way through the belly line. You need that nice sweep. We don't want that big chest shelf that you get on things like horses and whatnot. Now, in horses and everything, you're going to want that. Speaking of, these muscle abstractions, using the same type, these muscle groupings, these simplified muscle breakdowns, we can use these same sort of muscle breakdowns for things like running species. Just remember that chest abstraction in there. These are really kind of built in the same way, but you want to think about them in the similar way that you think about the construction forms, in the sense that they're flexible, they're malleable, right? We can bulk out the muscles, we can slim them down in certain areas. So on a horse, for instance, when we get to these hind legs, it'll be a lot more rounded and bulky and built out than on these stalker species. But it's all still there, right? It's all still the same kind of hookup for these quadrupeds. Just a little bit of repurposing of the shapes. Same as if we were altering the construction forms between a runner and a stalker. Really no different. All right, so the midsection, like I was saying, really important to get that sweep coming through. We can go ahead and get, a little bit of a indication of the pectorals coming through here. But we really don't need much, if anything. You really don't see much of it on a stalker species. If you get anything on these guys, what it'll be is an indication of the lats. So the lats, what you're going to get, them coming up here. And again, that's still very kind of, sort of. It's going to depend on the individual. More than anything, I'd say just focus on the overall barrel shape of this section. Midsections in general, for most species, it's just there's not much to it, Everybody, despite our obsession as a culture to have abdominals and everything, there's not a lot to those muscles. It's just a sheet. It's a big sheet of muscle that's there to kind of keep your guts in. Nothing more to it. And that's similar on these guys. It's just a big sheet. We get a little bit of the lats here, like I was saying before. Latissimus dorsi. But then when we come down here, we can just keep it simple. Keep it like a nice little barrel shape down there. Still want to get that break in there. We still want a little break where it follows the rib cage a little bit and then goes over the lumbar. We need that little arch in that lower back, that arch in the lumbar there. We get a little bit of the lower back muscles coming in here. That's kind of a tuck-in point for those lats. Let's go ahead and get a little darker on our stylus here. There we go. There we go. It's looking good. Digging what we're seeing. And then as we come back here, right, we're now approaching the hindquarters. And we need to go ahead and get into the muscles of these rear legs. So let's just go ahead and refine these shapes really quick. Just like we did in week 2, just coming in and refining our construction forms, getting a little more fluid with them. There we are. Getting our paws in there. Just bringing up this back leg just a little bit. Playing around with those muscles of the forearm back there. And that far paw. You have a little bit of pronation as it turns and rotates a little bit outwards. We might get a little bit of the dew claw poking out from the back there. This guy's getting a little more stocky. He's now becoming a little more jaguar, a little less leopard. That's kind of fun. Jaguars have these they're like these little compact tanks. They're these crazy little pit bulls of a cat. They're just all muscle and they have this big old cinder block head. Because the way that they get their prey is they crush skulls. These are animals that are taking on crocodilians to eat sometimes. So they've got crazy bite force. They're crazy powerful, really fun little cats. Anyways, starting to look a little bit more like one of those guys, a jaguar, than a leopard, and that's okay. I'm kind of digging it. So just getting a little bit of a separation down here for the tendons coming down by the ankle. Sometimes you get a little bit of a pocket there. I just want to show that off. I always get people asking about the little pocket back there. So always make sure when we get to this phase to kind of show that off. Now, coming up, let's go ahead and feel out the muscles of this upper leg. Let's check that out, right? So first thing we want to do is identify the patella. We've talked about that in our construction forms before, right? So we've got our hip abstraction here, saddle shapes coming down the side, and the patella is going to land right kind of here, right where that saddle shape starts to turn to go towards the back is where we find that patella. And that's no different here on our more advanced construction form as we get into it. The patella is going to sit right here. So we can go ahead and get that patella in there. Perfect. Now what we want to do is go ahead and get the glutes started. We can go ahead and start the glutes. The way I like to find them is coming back here, and as this, stylus switched out on me. As this drops down, as this back plane of the hips drops down, we have our corner back here, right? That corner is where we're going to start finding our glute abstraction here, our glute breakdown. And we're just going to go ahead and design in a little wedge shape. We're going to pull it from corner to corner, and it's just going to be like this little curved kind of wedge shape that pops right on in there. We can even go ahead and give it a little bit of volume here too. Good stuff. There we go. Now that we've got our little diamond wedge shape there for our glutes, we can come in and get in the muscles of the upper leg. And we're not going to go into them too much. I'm not, like I said before, I'm not going to go into specifics of the muscle insertions here because it's a class all in and of itself. It really is. So what I'm going to do instead is go over the big sections, right? There's essentially 3 sections here that we're going to have making up this hind leg. We've got our glutes, which we already have established, this little kind of wedge shape that notches right in there on our saddle shape, kind of spanning from corner to corner and pointing downwards here. Next are going to be 2 interlocking sections that kind of wrap around one another. So the first one is going to radiate out from this back corner where we started our glutes, and it's going to wrap up and encompass our patella. So what we want to do, reinforce this section here. We're just going to sweep this through in a really nice S-curve right on through. And we're going to do the same thing down here. We're just going to sweep it right on down. It kind of encompasses this entire area right here. Just a couple interlocking, sweeping forms that make up this section. And now we already have our last, hold on here. I'm going to go ahead and just add a little more volume to that to make it read a little better. When I zoomed out, I was like, ooh, that's a little messy. Here we go. And now as we come up here, we can go ahead and add in our second little wedge here. Just add a little bit of volume to this shape here and have it interlock. Now, a lot of this has connective tissue coming over it. So a lot of these individual muscles kind of merge together when you get towards the front edge of this leg. The area that you're going to see the most amount of definition is going to be back here. So what you can see I'm doing now that I have those sheets, those our wedge and then our 2 kind of wraparound sheets that lock into one another, right? Now that I have those happening in the right placement, what we can do is come in here and just get a little more subtle with the edge work Make them a little less deep, a little more shallow, right? And then as we come back to the far side here, really wedge that in. Now the forms of the lower leg, a lot of times, folks really want to go ahead and get this kind of giant chicken drumstick here on this back leg for some reason. I kind of blame dragon art and dinosaur concept art and things for wanting people to play this area up. So you'll see this a lot of times in concept art, where this whole area here is kind of like a giant, really big, defined kind of chicken drumstick sort of shape, right? Yeah, the gastrocnemius, the calf muscle does have sort of that shape to it, but you're not going to see it as this like crazy defined drumstick. What you're going to get is something a little more subtle. That's something I always like pointing out in this class, because it's going to make a difference in your drawings. You're going to notice it. People are going to notice it. They're going to see things as looking more natural in those areas. So we're staying really nice and subtle there with that curve. Remember, we have that C curve that we first initially established there, right? If you remember, on these hind legs, we go S curve, C curve to flat to C curve. We want to keep that integrity in there, but just get a little bit of variation. Again, we don't want to get that big, chicken drumstick, turkey leg kind of vibe to it. We can get a little bit of that bulge, but we want to keep that sweep first, establish that sweep first rather, and then build off just a little bit of an extra nuance and topography in there. Not much at all. And this gets tucked under that sheet that we established. And it just comes right on down. It's what forms the top edge of the little pocket right there. There we go. Perfect. There we are. Nice stuff. We can go ahead and get some of the tendons down here in the leg. Flexors and extenders figured out. Here we go. This is pretty much what I want you guys to do for your homework today. So you have, for homework, a really great piece of reference. With that piece of reference, Big Cat reference, I want you to go ahead and utilize the knowledge that you have here and the handout. Let me restart there. I'm like kind of rambling as I'm finishing the little sketch of our musculature here. All right, let me go over homework one more time here to make it make more sense and be a little less rambly for you instead of focusing on the drawing here. So your homework, you've got two different handouts. You've got one that's a worksheet from me. It's a little bit of a muscular breakdown, similar to what we just did here in our demo, and it explains how to break down those forms a little bit. So you can use that for reference. And then you have a piece of actual reference, a photographic piece of reference of a big cat in motion. So utilize that picture and do a construction muscular drawing like this. You do not need to get into specific muscles. Again, I just want to see the construction forms further refined into a little bit of musculature like we're having here and like you have on my worksheet that I provided for you. So take that picture, draw that pose in this kind of format, and work to really make sure that the muscle forms that you're adding in are following and being extensions of our construction forms that we already have learned and worked on, right? We don't want to go ahead and kind of add them on top of. We want them to be a part of, right? Cool. This back foot is just bothering me to no end, so I'm going to go ahead and redraw that really quick in the last little second here because, oh my God, it's driving me nuts. That toe placement was just, ugh, all off. There we go. Now I can sleep well and live with myself. All right, so hopefully this demo was informative and you guys had a good time with it. Big thing to remember with this all. As I said, do not get wrapped up in little tiny specifics. Remember that these are extensions of the, or rather not extensions, I guess the better word would be more specific breakdowns of those construction forms that you already learned. There's nothing different from the construction forms you've already been practicing because that's what this is. It's just a further refinement of those forms. Don't think of it as adding on to those forms. Think of it as refining those forms more. Cool? Just adding a couple little highlights here to kind of pop that form a little bit more. Show it off. And there we go. There's our ripped little cat that we got, our little leopard that became a jaguar. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me for the demo, everybody. I absolutely love talking to you all and kind of covering these topics, obviously. And I really look forward to seeing what you do with that homework. Take your time with the homework. Make sure you figure out those forms. Again, it's a dynamic moving form, so it is going to be a little tricky. Slow down. Make sure you're plotting in the angles for things like that that chest wedge. That backward slant to that chest abstraction is going to be key to making sure that you get things like your deltoids and your triceps in the right areas. Cool. Great stuff, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the course, and I can't wait to see what you do with this homework. I will talk to you all next week. Take care, everyone.